Hello and welcome to The Print. I am Maushumi Dasgupta, and today I have with me former chairman of the Central Board of Excise and Customs, Mr. Najib Shah, to discuss the latest development on the tariff war. Despite a 90-day pause on some tariffs, US President Donald Trump Sunday warned that no country would be getting off the hook for the unfair trade balances and non monetary tariff barriers that other countries have used against America. So, we are going to discuss this with Mr. Shah and other issues related to tariff. Welcome to the print, sir.
Good afternoon to you. Well, thank you.
So my first question is that, on Sunday, Mr. Trump posted on his social media and said that there was no tariff exception and products like smartphones and computers are subject to existing 20% fentanyl tariffs. It's just that they would be put in a separate tariff category, separate tariff bucket, like he called it. So what does it mean for countries like China and India?
It means a lot more of uncertainty because at no point of time are we sure what US is likely to do. And this is very bad for business and trade. If you are to factor any exports, you obviously need to know what tariffs the other country is going to put and accordingly make your costing. Here are goods which are supposed to have been off the bucket, to use the phraseology of President Trump, and which he now says they're going to be in the bucket. And remember, he also has talked about pharmaceuticals, another major area of concern.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
India, which again we thought would be exempted, but from what we hear now, it is not going to be exempted, but they're working on some special tariffs for these commodities.
Yes. So this also comes close on the heels of White House saying that, tariffs on imports of Chinese-made smartphones and some other electronic devices would not apply. Tariff won't apply there. And then he comes and says that, all of them would be put but in a different category. So do you think that the tariff on these products will be similar to the staggering 145% reciprocal tariff that have been imposed on Chinese goods?
I don't think so, simply because Apple is a major manufacturer in China, and it's a major supplier of phones from China to US. And Apple is a very, very American company. But having said that, for the sake of optics, I would think that the US will have to really weigh the option whether they should go in for a separate tariff list for these commodities or stick to 145. And if I may just add, what people in the discussions forget is the challenges which the tax administration will be facing. Now you have commodities coming from various countries which were said to be subject to separate tariffs before the pause came. You have commodities, specific commodities which are going to have separate tariffs. Then you have commodities coming in from China, all of which will have a higher elevated tariff. So what it means is that your importer in US will accordingly have to be declaring. The information technology systems, the IT systems, will have to now be tweaked to ensure they capture all these details. And you notice that the messages coming in from the Customs and Border Protection, which is the US organization which looks after all imports and exports, they are at their wits' end. It's very obvious because they're trying to cope up with all these changes. And every such policy change will also have to have a corresponding change in the IT systems to facilitate export, which is resulting in chaos in the ports. Currently, all vessels are congested in the ports of US. Starting between 2 days to 10 days is the waiting time. And that is only because of the uncertainty. And this too will add to the cost to the American consumer.
But sir, this recent threat to impose tariff in a separate category for semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, the entire supply chain. I mean, what could be its possible impact, considering the fact that much of this supply chain is largely dependent on Chinese manufacturing?
Absolutely, it'll be devastating. It'll be devastating because it is not just the final product in very many cases which comes from China. It's all the supply chain components which are coming from China. So estimates range from $1,000 to up which will increase the cost of all products in the US by virtue of this tariff. And simply it will be uneconomical for anybody to import anything from China. 145% is a tariff after which you will have nothing left. So I don't think any imports will take place from China. What America will have to necessarily do is look for other supply chains, which are not going to be easy to replicate what is the manufacturing powerhouse of the world. They'll have to look at local investments, which is going to take a long time. But they'll have to look at local manufacturing, which is going to take an even longer time. So I don't think it's the good news for the American consumer and the American markets.
Do you think that India stands to benefit in any way from all this?
India's strengths in these specific commodities are not too much. They're there, all right, but not too much. We are much smaller supplier of these goods into the American markets.
And it will take time if you have to kind of set up your own manufacturing.
Precisely. It is going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight. And mind you, all other countries also be similarly viewing this opportunity, if I may call it, and the 10% tariff only, which everybody is going to be levied with. Unless, again, whatever be the tariff for smartphones, electronics, semiconductors, will be uniform across countries, unless he chooses, again, to have country-specific tariffs. The uncertainty is killing. It is not good. No taxation system can survive in an uncertain environment.
Right. Sir, also, I mean, do you think that this 90-day pause on the imposition of reciprocal tariff, I mean, of course, with the exception of China, gives India sort of a window for maybe some kind of a course correction by reducing tariffs? Or let me put it differently. I mean, with the threat of this reciprocal tariff looming large, do you think that a reduction in tariff by India will help make the domestic industry become more competitive?
A reduction in tariffs will hurt domestic industry. They're used to certain protections, which protection will be removed. And how much of this reduction in tariffs will appease, if that's the right word to use, the US administration is a matter of conjecture. Because we have already reduced tariffs in the budget. We have already reduced equalization levy, for instance, and tariffs in whiskey and motorcycles and stuff like that, all of which were in Mr. Trump's agenda list. But he's obviously looking at a lot more. And with India, the concerns of US are not just the tariffs, but the so-called non-tariff barriers, which is something which India will really hesitate to go full force to reduce, because these are essential in one way or other, not just for the protection of Indian industry, but for the protection of the Indian economy. We're talking about the BIS standards. They're not happy with that. They're talking of IP protection. They're not happy with that. They're talking of access to agriculture. Now, that's something we are going to be extremely hesitant to open up. So these are challenges. And all this will come on the table if we enter the bilateral trade treaty route.
That's going on right now.
Yes, which is not just going to be a reduction in tariffs for goods, but it's going to open a whole host of other challenges which the Indian negotiators will have to navigate.
Right. So do you think that India will agree to a 0 for 0 tariff strategy with Washington, or any item by item parity?
That is something which is going to be very good for India if we can do that. Because what that will mean is that
is going to be
good. It will be good. A 0 for 0 tariff will be good for India. Simply because what it means that we choose the commodities, we try to protect the Indian export market. Basically, we are now talking of those commodities on which a 10% levy is being levied in the US market for the Indian goods. Which are those commodities? We're talking of textiles, we're talking of gems and jewelry, all of which are critical for the Indian export. And so, correspondingly, for those items, we will have a 0%. That's what reciprocity would typically mean, unless, of course, the US changes its definition of what reciprocity is all about. But otherwise, when I talk of 0 for 0, I'm saying you reduce my tariffs on textiles to 0. I will reduce the tariffs on textiles to 0 for India. When you export to India. And mind you, none of these goods which you're talking of are goods which typically the US exports to India. So the 0 for 0, while it will be good, may not translate into like-to-like goods. And if that doesn't happen, it's not good for India.
Also, sir, any tariff reduction would face a lot of opposition from the domestic industry, which for a long time have been used to this tariff protectionism.
Yes, but don't forget we have had multiple free trade agreements, and we are in the process of finalizing free trade agreements with US, with the EU and UK. All of which will be resulting in tariff reductions, but only for imports coming from these countries. We have roughly around 14, 15 free trade agreements right now, including with ASEAN, right? Where we are already used to huge amount of tariff reductions for specific commodities coming in from imports from specific countries. So this will only mean more of that. So I think a free trade agreement at one level may not be a bad option, provided we are able to get out of the requirements of the non-tariff barriers. Having said that, otherwise, zero for zero, if you can convince the US that we are going to reduce the tariffs of those commodities which are being exported to US from India. But if the US gives us a different list of commodities which they want us to reduce, we'll have to see whether it makes sense for us to get into the zero for zero, because those commodities may not be the export commodities of India.
In fact, the bilateral trade talks are happening this week only. So,
yes.
Also, sir, I mean, do you think? I mean, has any of the earlier FTAs benefited India in terms of promoting exports?
I have been a vocal critic of FTAs simply because, remember, what does the FTA contemplate? It contemplates reduction in tariffs. All other countries with whom we are entering into FTA, for instance, EU or UK, already have very depressed tariffs. So when we reduce the tariffs, we're going to lose a lot more revenue, open up a market a lot more, pose a severe threat of imports for our domestic manufacturers than what we will get from UK or EU, whose tariffs are already much lesser than India's comparatively. That's what happened when we entered into tariffs with FTA with ASEAN. And there is one study which somehow has not got the publicity which it deserves, which clearly shows that our exporters did not or could not capitalize on the free trade agreement. Remember the cultural challenges. What are the countries in ASEAN? Thailand and Brunei and Malaysia, all of which have cultural challenges. We have language challenges. We have a framework which is very different. We perhaps did not take the Indian trade and exporters on board to understand their concerns as to what we should do to get benefits in those countries for the Indian exporters. We have learned our lessons. I understand that the present FTAs being negotiated with EU and UK, there's a lot more industry interaction which is going on with the ministry to ensure that we get some benefits which are really looking for in those countries. And those countries, remember, will be looking at much more than tariffs. They'll be looking at access to the Indian financial markets. They'll be looking at access to relaxed standards, which again are going to be challenges for us. But let us see how it goes forward.
Right. Would the agreement with the US result in increasing our imports only, or I mean, do we get any export advantage beyond what are already there? I mean, what we already have.
No, it depends entirely on the range of commodities which are going to be fall under the FTA. Assuming, for instance, we identify which are our strengths in exports and ensure that all those commodities are covered in the FTA. The FTA is commodity specific. It highlights which are the commodities on which benefits are going to be extended. It highlights rules of origin, which are critical in a free trade agreement, which is we don't want third country goods to enter into the other country through the FTA route. So which means these goods have to be manufactured, produced within the country with whom we have an FTA agreement. So India's exporters have not in the past taken full advantage of FTAs. Our imports have increased. Our exports, non-FTA exports, in fact, are much more. So which is a sad commentary on how our FTAs have worked in the past.
Okay. And how exactly, I mean, it's a very basic question, but how exactly does a tariff adjustment happen in India, between the Ministry of Commerce and CBIC?
The Ministry of Commerce, which drives recognition and identification of commodities and markets. They identify the commodity on which they wish to have a FTA and the country with whom they wish to have an FTA. Having said that, the CBIC now comes into the picture to talk about what will be the impact of any reduction in a particular commodity, in terms of revenue, in terms of other industries in the country and other ministries in the country. So the CBIC acts as the sounding board for the Commerce Ministry to highlight the impact of which a particular reduction in tariff would result in. And so the two teams work closely together in any trade agreement.
Right. Since April 2, we have seen that, there has been a lot of back and forth on this whole tariff issue. President Trump announces something, then goes back, then comes up with something else. For instance, on Monday, yesterday, President Trump suggested that he might temporarily exempt the auto industry from tariffs. He had previously imposed. So, I mean, do you think this whole this whole thing is well thought of, was planned in some way, or is just...
Very learned American commentators have all been grappling with this question, whether it is part of a deeper strategy, whether it is after the deal, as his press secretary called it, or whether it is just randomly decisions being taken. I would not like to contemplate. All I can say is that it hurts all businesses across the globe, the American industry and exporters and importers, as much as the global economy. The US is a major economy. It cannot be ignored, which is why all of us are discussing the imposition of tariffs by US.
And so again, that also brings to the other question that, do you think that recession is looming on the horizon?
Very many people believe the recession is arriving, simply because of these uncertainties. You had the stock markets plunging, you had the bond markets plunging, which is one of the reasons people speculate as to why Mr. Trump came to this decision. Have a pause, right? So we can only speculate at this point of time. But yes, it is not good for the economy. The bottom line is that.
You have also spoken in previous occasions that India needs to be alert that it should not be made a dumping ground. I mean, China diverting its products to India. So, if you can elaborate on that, sir.
You see, the reduction in tariffs, if we are not going to do that through a bilateral trade agreement, should be through what is known as a MFN. This is the most favored nation regime of the World Trade Organization, which means I reduce the tariffs universally across imports coming in from all countries. It's not country specific. Now, what the US has done by having this country specific tariffs is to have given a go-by to the established rules of imports and exports as prescribed by the WTO, on which they were a major votary. Now, if we are to have the reduction in tariffs without the bilateral trade, it would mean that reduced tariffs will also be available for Chinese imports. China has been known to be in the past of ensuring that their exports are suppressed, the cost of their exports are suppressed. We have a Directorate General of Trade Remedies, which looks at the cost at which goods are being imported into India and the impact it has on the Indian markets, and whether the goods are being exported at a cost lesser than the cost in the domestic country. And accordingly, we impose anti-dumping duty to make good for the difference. China has been and across the world, China has been the largest recipient, if I may use that word, of anti-dumping duties imposed by India and most of the other countries in the world. And we do this after elaborate investigations and after giving an opportunity to the importer in India of Chinese goods. So the fear is that China, being a manufacturing powerhouse, can possibly ensure that they are able to export goods at a reduced price, take advantage also of the reduced tariffs, because this tariff, if we reduce, will be universal across every imports coming from every country, and that will hugely hurt the Indian exporter. What the Indian exporter also needs to do is to become more competitive. I mean, and I think as ministries, the Commerce Ministry needs to look at markets other than US. US is an important market, but it's not the only market. We have Latin America, we have EU, and really we should be exploring all of the markets to compensate for possible loss in the US markets itself.
And this is the time to, work on that.
Absolutely. This is a crisis and this is an opportunity which has arisen because of the crisis. If we're not doing it in the past, we have to do it now.
Okay. And so what do you, again, a very speculative question, but what do you think is going to happen after 90 days? I mean, after the 90-day pause gets over?
Let us hope that in these 90 days, Mr. Trump has talked of 75 countries running to get into some sort of an agreement. He has named India as a third country after Korea, South Korea, and Japan. So let us hope that 90 days we are working, we arrive at some agreement which will give certainty for the Indian exporters and what that agreement will pan out to be, whether it will be a bilateral trade agreement or a zero for zero commodity specific agreement. We'll have to wait and see. But if the idea of an agreement will be to bring certainty, because what price should I export my goods at? If I know that 10% is there, I'll factor that in my costing. If 10% is not there, I'll factor that according to my costing. My goods become more competitive. And the Indian government also supports our exporters. We have multiple schemes to offset the possible loss which the Indian exporter feels when he exports. And we try to make it as WTO compliant as possible. So we give back all the taxes he pays. We don't want to export taxes. We just want to export goods. So all the taxes which he pays, we give some sort of a remission. So we try to make the goods more competitive in these markets. So the Indian exporter will want certainty. He'll like to know what price at which should I be selling my product, which I will know only if I know what will be the tariff in that other country where I'm exporting. Because the US importer will be closely looking at the costing before he goes in for that. And if 10% is going to be across all goods, he may very well look at Vietnam or Bangladesh for our similar goods.
Right. So as far as the pharma sector is concerned, right now, no tariff has been imposed, but President Trump has said that, even that sector won't be spared. So what does it mean for India's pharmaceutical sector, considering that, India is the biggest supplier of generic products to US? Does it mean Indian pharma sector shifting out to some other markets, looking beyond US?
As a rule, I think there's a wake-up call for all Indian exporters. They need to look at more than one market. You can't afford to have your exports in one basket. That's a lesson which every country has learned, I think.
Which is the case right now.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely the case right now. So we have to start looking at other markets. We have to exploit this 90 days as much as we can, do double and triple and quadruple shifts to ensure you enhance your production and send the goods as much as they can to US. I'm told Apple, for instance, from Bangalore, is supposed to have sent 6 plane loads of Apple phones to beat the tariffs.
Yeah.
So that's something with the Indian pharma industry, if they have the scaling ability, should try and do. And work closely with the Commerce Ministry so that when the Commerce Ministry is finalizing any sort of agreement, their concerns are taken on board so that we do not get a raw deal and our exporters are able to compete in the market. The tragedy, however, is we do not know what is the tariff going to be. That is the uncertainty which is going to be killing both for the Commerce Ministry to make this negotiation and for the Indian pharma exporters.
Right. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us for this interview.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.